Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin McCabe with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by the Carbon Capture, Utilization and Storage, or CCUS initiative, an initiative of the Clean Energy Ministerial. We're excited to announce that today's event is also in partnership with representatives from the European Commission, or EC, who will be discussing the role of CCS in the EU Green Deal. We have a full agenda waiting, so let's quickly go through some of the nuts and bolts of the event today. So if you can hear me, then you have already connected successfully to the audio for this event. However, if at any point you encounter technical difficulties with the webinar platform, you may contact the GoToWebinar's help desk at the numbers shown on this screen. That is 888-259-3826. And they should be able to provide most types of audio-video support. If you would like to ask a question, we ask that you use the questions pane of the GoToWebinar platform, where you may type it in at any time during the webinar. Shortly following the conclusion of the event, this recording will be added to the YouTube, and the presentation slides will be uploaded to the Clean Energy Solutions Center site, links for which can be found here. A brief reminder to our audience that the recordings from previous webinars held by the CCUS initiative are hosted in a dedicated YouTube playlist. Follow the link on this slide. Again, slides will be posted following the conclusion of the event, or perhaps easiest, simply search for Clean Energy Solutions Center on YouTube and click on the playlist tab. The SEM CCUS video playlist can be found there. Before we jump into the presentations, I'll provide a quick introduction of today's panelists, followed by a brief welcoming statement by Stig Svenningsson of the SEM CCUS initiative and the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy for Norway, who will provide some context for today's webinar. Then, following the panelist presentations, Stig will moderate the panel discussion and Q&A session, where the panelists will address questions submitted to them by the audience and engage in a discussion of topics relevant to today's presentations. Our first speaker today will be Peter Horvath, Policy Officer within the Directorate General, or DG, for Energy, and responsible for innovation, research, digitalization, and competitiveness. Following Peter will be Jan Steinkel, Policy Officer, also within the DG for Energy, specifically focusing on renewables and energy system integration policy. After Jan, we will hear from Vasilios Kougionas, Policy Officer within the Directorate General for Research and Innovation, focusing on clean energy transition. Following Vasilios, we will hopefully hear from Katrine Prins, who's having some technical difficulties, Policy Officer within the DG for Energy, in the units responsible for internal market for electricity and gas, energy efficiency and renewables, and now in infrastructure and regional cooperation. And our final panelist today is Maria Volkova, Policy Officer within the Directorate General for Climate Action. And last but certainly not least, as I mentioned previously, our host and moderator for today's event is Stig Svenningsson, Deputy Director General within the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy Norway, and a co-lead of the SEM CCUS initiative. And with that, I'm happy to now turn things over to Stig for some brief opening remarks. Stig?
Thank you, Kevin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the initiative and its members. And thank you for joining us today. We very much appreciate your time. I also want to thank the European Commission for preparing today's webinar presentations. Before handing the floor to our speakers, I would like to briefly introduce the Clean Energy Ministerial CCUS initiative to those of you who have not yet heard of us. The Clean Energy Ministerial, or the SEM, was established in 2010 and today has 28 members across the world, from all continents and both from north and south. The SEM member countries make 90% of clean energy investments globally, but they are also responsible for 75% of global CO2 emissions. So this is a very relevant global partnership to accelerate clean energy. The CCUS initiative is one of over 20 work streams under the SEM. Our members are 12 SEM governments, and if you look at our membership, you will notice that it represents the critical mass of countries who lead in CCUS globally. Our initiative is led by 4 countries: Norway, Saudi Arabia, US, and the UK. Next slide, please. Our common objective is to accelerate CCUS together. We do this because we believe that CCUS has a vital role to play as part of a clean energy portfolio. Firstly, by actively working to include CCUS within the global clean energy agenda in both the SAM discussions and also in other relevant global fora. Secondly, by bringing together the private sector, governments, and investment community. Thirdly, by facilitating identification of both near and longer term investment opportunities. And finally, by disseminating best practice in CCUS policy, regulation, and investment, including through webinars such as the one you are attending today. If your government or organization is interested in learning more, please get in touch. Our contact details will be on the screen at the end of the webinar. Today, we will be hearing from the European Commission on what role CCUS can play in the ambitious European Green Deal. The interest and the recognition of CCUS have increased recently, and a number of EU member states have strongly increased their attention on CCUS. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about what European policies and programs can target and help achieve. With that brief introduction, I will hand over to Peter Hovard from DG Energy to drive the presentation with his colleagues, and I will be back with you for the discussion and Q&A. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Stig, and good morning, good afternoon to all attendees of this webinar. Just so, by way of introduction, let me just frame this these presentations from the European Commission side, and then colleagues from the different departments will come in to cover the particular policies and funding instruments that we run at the EC. So the main objective of the EU Green Deal is to transform the EU into a net zero emissions economy by 2050. Raising the ambition of EU climate action was seen necessary in respect to the implementation of the Paris Agreement and was confirmed by the European Council. This graph dates from before the European Green Deal's adoption. It shows different technology pathways to 80 to 95% GHG reduction, as well as 3 pathways on the right-hand side compatible with the 1.5C target that would require climate neutrality by 2050. The graph clearly showed that delivering on a higher climate ambition will require more CO2 reduction via CCS by 2050. Next slide, please. In the European Union, European institutions involving member states adopt the energy and climate targets and related policies based on the Commission's proposals. At the same time, EU countries have the authority and responsibility to make the technology choices and define the energy mix in line with those targets. The Commission's job is to develop a favorable regulatory environment for the clean energy transition and to invest European resources into the development and deployment of relevant projects, including in the area of CCS. This slide summarizes the EU policies most relevant for CCS. They are dealt with by different EC departments, including those for energy, climate action, research and innovation, and sustainable finance. Most of these departments are represented in this panel now and will share details on their respective activities. Climate neutrality by 2050 will certainly require CCS in a number of areas, be it for energy-intensive industries or residual emissions in the power sector or negative emissions. The 2030 framework is also important for CCS. The climate target plan requires that CCS is tested at scale by 2030. The rest of the policies address different aspects of the energy transition and are relevant for CCS from closer or farther. The energy system integration strategy envisages the integration of different energy sources and infrastructures into a single, flexible, clean energy system. The Trans-European Networks regulation provides for creating trans-European interconnections, including CO2 networks. The so-called CCS directive requires environmental soundness of storing CO2 in geological formations. The EU emission trading scheme incentivizes CCS in certain sectors by recognizing it as a valid way of reducing CO2 emissions. The SET plan, or the Strategic Energy Technology Plan, coordinates research and innovation strategies among member states, including on CCS. And finally, the Sustainable Taxonomy Regulation, which is still in the making, will recognize investment into CCS as compatible with the EU Green Deal objectives. Next slide, please. Beside policy, the EC also has strong funding instruments helping CCS to happen. The EU has been supporting CCS projects for nearly 20 years now, primarily from the EU Research and Innovation Framework programs, and more recently from the Connecting Europe facility. For many, EU funding was key for improving technology readiness and for planning CO2 transportation infrastructure. As of this year, we will also have the Innovation Fund that is probably the most suitable EU program for large-scale CCS development. Finally, I would just like to draw your attention to the Recovery and Resilience Facility that is a central piece in Europe's recovery strategy. It has a significant budget, of which 37% will have to be invested into energy and climate projects. Member states are currently preparing their plans, and some may use it for developing CCS. And with this overview, I would pass the floor to the next speaker. I believe this is Vasilios. Or this is Jan, actually. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's Jan, actually.
Yes. Hi, thank you, Peter. Hello, everybody. Yes, so the European Green Deal, as Peter mentioned, is this is the central strategy for the Commission under its President Ursula von der Leyen. And for us, it's a wide strategy. We see it as a growth strategy. It's quite a wide remit. You know, we see as an instrument to reach a fair and prosperous society and a modern and resource efficient economy. So, and importantly, it sets out our target to become climate neutral in 2050. And the European Green Deal guides our policy making in a wide range of areas, from agriculture to biodiversity, circular economy, the post-COVID recovery spending that Peter mentioned, and of course energy, which is still responsible for 75% of our CO2 emissions. And a key of our energy and climate policy are targets. And for 2030, we have the ambition, the 2050 ambition, to become climate neutral. And for 2030, we already have legally binding targets. And this is greenhouse gas emissions reductions of 40%, a share of renewables in energy of 32%. And that's really all energy. So if we only look at renewable electricity, that'd be above 50%. And then, of course, energy efficiency. These targets, we want to increase those targets. We're in the process of increasing these targets to 55% greenhouse gas emissions reduction and a renewable share of 38 to 40%. They are not in law yet, though. Next slide, please. And so over the last 1.5 years, we looked at what we need to do to reach these ambitious targets in the energy system, in energy policy. And the result of our thinking is the energy system integration strategy, in which we set out a vision of on how we can accelerate the transition towards an integrated and resilient energy system. And in the preparation of this strategy, we mapped the energy system, we looked at electrification, we looked at ways to integrate the sector. We looked at waste flows and tried to see where they could be recycled, and how to get to an energy system that is a holistic energy system where we're not stuck in the traditional version of looking at it, where you look at certain energy carriers and link them to certain users, like for instance the use of oil products in the transport sector. So we wanted to break away from that and get to this what you see on the right hand side, integrated system. And as I said, for that we mapped waste flows, and that also included CO2, which we will still have in our energy system, even though we will drastically increase the share of renewables. And this is why the strategy also contains a section on enabling carbon capture, storage, and use to support decarbonisation. And linked to this strategy, we also developed the hydrogen strategy. Next slide, please. And these are two documents which guides our work. This is the climate target plan, so for 2030. This was an impact assessment and modeling work of what we need to do to reach our 2030 targets. And CCS also plays a role here. And then the other basis is the long-term strategy that Peter already mentioned, which also shows that in order to reach climate neutrality, we will need CCS. We will need it for hard-to-abate sectors, industrial sectors. This is really the focus of CCS in Europe, and we will need it to we'll need it for carbon removal. In the power sector in Europe, we believe that the role will be marginal, because in the power sector, most of the decarbonisation effort will be driven by renewables and energy efficiency. Thank you, and I hand over to Vasilios now.
Thank you, Jan. And so I will continue with the research and innovation program of the European Union. So the Horizon Europe is the next EU research and innovation program for the period 2021 to 2027, building on the achievements and success of Horizon 2020. So in December 2020, the EU institutions reached political agreement for a budget of around 95.5 billion, and this includes 5.4 billion from the Next Generation EU package to boost EU recovery. And this actually represents a 30% increase over Horizon 2020, and this makes Horizon Europe the most ambitious research and innovation program in the world. So Horizon Europe aims actually to be for sustainable and prosperous future for people and the planet, and by tackling the climate change, and with over 35% of its funds supporting the achievement of climate goals under the Green Deal, while boosting at the same time the Union's competitiveness and growth. The approach that is taken is for setting the Horizon Europe under co-creation between the services to assure maximum cooperation. And under Horizon 2020, there are 6 clusters addressing global challenges, and Cluster 5 is addressing the climate, energy, and mobility, which is a budget of estimated around 15 billion, which also will address the research innovation on CCUS. So the first work program is expected to be published by April 2021, and the first course then will be open and will include topic on CCUS. Next slide, please. So supporting CCUS research innovation it's an important part of Horizon Europe because we believe CCUS will play a crucial role in the Green Deal, in particular in the transition of energy-intensive industries and the power sector towards climate neutrality. We aim to fund demonstration of the full CCS chain by integrating CCUS in industrial facilities, and then research and innovation to achieve cost reduction of CO2 capture, reducing the energy penalty. We also aim to integrate CCUS in hubs and clusters and boosting the knowledge sharing activities between large-scale CCUS projects. We also need to ascertain safe CO2 storage. That's why we continue to do research on CO2 storage, especially on monitoring and verification. And then, of course, low carbon hydrogen from natural gas with CCUS is also very important for achieving our climate neutrality and in the transition towards full use of renewable hydrogen up to 2030 by enabling early clean hydrogen at the same time, needing to ensuring the building of hydrogen infrastructure, which later would be used, of course, by green hydrogen. Achieving our ambitious climate goals, of course, will require CCUS to be combined with sustainable biomass in order to achieve negative emissions. And then, of course, conversion of captured CO2 to useful products is also important for the European industry, and this will also contribute to decarbonisation and the Green Deal. Next slide, please. So under the Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe, international research cooperation on CCUS is targeted for mission innovation. And one important project actually that was funded by the European Commission under Horizon 2020 was the so-called ACT-RNET. ACT was very successful as an international initiative to establish CCUS as a tool to combat climate change, and ACT has actually 16 partners to fund research and innovation projects that can lead to safe and cost-effective CCUS technology. ACT has attracted funding agencies from all over the world, and it has organized 3 calls of proposals, especially in the last 2 calls focusing on projects under Mission Innovation Challenge 3, and it has served as a vehicle for mission innovation to fund multinational projects, and then therefore is an example for other mission innovation challenges. Under the second and the third call, actually countries outside Europe, such as United States, Canada, and India have joined the fund as funding partners. And the third call actually is ongoing, and the deadline of submission of full proposals is the 15th of March 2021. We aim to continue this initiative under Horizon Europe under a new partnership which will be called Clean Energy Transition Partnership, and under which the European countries will join funds to specific energy technologies, and CCS, of course, will be included in it. This partnership also aims to have collaboration with the Clean Energy Ministerial and the Mission Innovation. Next slide, please. It was already mentioned by Peter, the Strategic Energy Technology Plan, which aims actually to boost Europe's transition towards climate neutral energy system through the development of low carbon technologies in a fast and cost competitive way. Actually, it helps to promote cooperation among EU countries and set plan countries, companies and research institutions. The set plan consists actually of a set plan steering group, the European Technology Innovation Platforms, under which the Zero Emission Platform ETIP for CCUS is a member, the European Energy Research Alliance, and also a set plan information system we called SETIS. So under the set plan, actually ambitious targets were set for each energy technology, and the implementation working groups were established, consisting of representatives from European Commission, set plan, European countries, the industry, and research organization. Specifically for the implementation working group on CCUS, there are 11 active countries, and the co-leaders are Norway and the Netherlands, and the Zero Emission Power Platform. And there is a project which is called Impact9, which is covering the functioning of this group. Given actually the ambitious, the high ambitions of the European Green Deal and the climate law, as well as the increased 2030 targets, the CCUS State Plan Plenary Group has endorsed actually new targets and has endorsed an estimate from the current 15 megaton of CO2 to 50 megaton per atom of CO2 needs to be abated by CCUS by 2030, and it has proposed therefore updated and very ambitious implementation plan targets in order to drive CCUS research and innovation and deployment towards 2030. Thank you very much. So I will now pass the floor, I think, to Katrina.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? I hope.
Yes,
We hear you well, Katrin.
Very good, very good. I'm now sharing my webcam. So to start with my slides, I will be talking a bit about the regulation on trans-European energy infrastructure. This is what my unit does. It's cross-border infrastructure and regional integration and cooperation in the EU. The revised regulation on trans-European energy networks will exclude natural gas infrastructure, will exclude oil pipelines, but it will support dedicated hydrogen networks and electrolyzers above 100 megawatt capacity, and it will also include the smart grids category. Now, in relation to CO2 transport infrastructure, we have proposed to keep it in the scope of the regulation as it has been until now. So support for cross-border pipeline infrastructure. When it comes to CO2 transport by ships and trucks, we need to keep in mind that TEN-E is about cross-border infrastructure planning, and mobile assets like ships and trucks and other means do not fulfill this definition. As for the inclusion of geological storage, we believe that TEN-E is not the right instrument to address this issue, and other instruments exist that could do it. It also lacks the cross-border dimension, which is required for TEN-E. Moreover, it seems that the key barrier to the deployment of geological storage of CO2 is access to financing and not barriers in relation to cross-border infrastructure. The financing barrier could be addressed by other EU and national financing instruments, such as the Innovation or Modernization Fund, for instance, which automatically leads me to Maria's presentation, if Maria is there from DG Klima.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm indeed here, and if you could pass on to the next slide, I will present to you in brief terms the Innovation Fund. So the Innovation Fund is one of the biggest EU programs to supporting large-scale demonstrations and first of its kind plants in low carbon technologies. The scope of the program is not only CCS, but CCUS actually mentioned specifically in the objectives of the program. We can support with the Innovation Fund various types of low carbon technologies in energy intensive industries, renewable energy, and energy storage. We say that the program has about 10 billion, but that is actually an amount which is calculated based on 20 euro the ton of CO2 price, which means that over the period of the program, which is 10-year period, we have actually to sell 450 million allowances, meaning that we are quite likely to have more than 10 billion to spend, to invest in low carbon technologies. Actually, with the rising CO2 price, it makes it also easier for those technologies to reach financial close. So if you could move to the next slide. It explains in very brief terms the program. I already mentioned the volume and that in fact the money are generated through the EU emission trading scheme, so it's our carbon market. And we plan to publish annual calls for large-scale and small-scale projects. I will present to you in the next slides the first results from the first large-scale call. No, if you could go back, sorry. I do hope I won't be spending a lot of time, but I still wanted to say a few more things on this slide. Most importantly is that the amount of money, actually the amount of grant is not limited in volume, but it's limited by this 60% of the additional costs related to innovative technologies that we can fund. What are these additional costs? In fact, this is the financial gap of projects. So we can fund up to 60%, meaning that there is quite, in some cases, quite a big financial gap remaining for projects. So they need to find additional funding, for example, from member states, or to believe in this technology, the technology they are developing, and invest in the technology themselves. What is also important to say is that we will be monitoring the projects for quite some time, because they have to reach financial close, they have to be constructed, entered into operation, and we will be monitoring over 10-year period of time for the large-scale projects. So it's really a long-term program. We offer also project development assistance for projects that are promising but not sufficiently mature. And the last thing to say, which differentiates the Innovation Fund from other EU programs, which quite often require a consortium of entities to submit an application. Here, actually, single applicants also, like single companies, can submit an application, which makes it easier because the projects that we aim to fund are really close to market projects. So next slide. In very brief terms, I will explain what we have received actually in the first call for large-scale projects, which closed end of October last year. We received over 311 proposals, which in total are requesting more than 21 billion euro in terms of grants. And the first call I didn't say, but it was somewhere on the slides, I think, is actually for 1 billion. So we have more than 21 oversubscription. The first call is actually run in 2 stages, and we are in the process of finalizing this first stage, evaluating these 311 proposals. And 70 of those proposals will be invited to submit second stage applications. And we will be able to, well, to select the successful projects towards the end of the year. So if you go on to the next slide, I will explain that in what sectors, in fact, these projects are. They are actually in all eligible sectors and in all eligible countries. So the eligible countries actually are the EU member states, but also Norway and Iceland. So we were very happy with the outcome because it shows really very big interest. And it's not surprising because this program, there was a predecessor program, some of you may have heard of, the NER 300 program, which actually had 2 calls in 2012 and 2014, so a very big gap. And also energy intensive industries, they never had a similar program. So it's really not surprising that we have such a big number of applications, and we are aiming, actually, we are already starting preparing the second call for large scale projects, which we hope to publish after the summer. And my last slide is actually focused on CCS, because of course today's audience is mostly interested in CCS. On the previous slide, there was like a number of 14 CCS projects. In fact, these are the projects which were submitted under the sector CO2 transport and storage. But when we analyzed the 311 proposals, we found out that actually about 60 majority of those proposals have some component of carbon capture, utilization, and or storage, so different combinations, quite often actually focusing on one element, so capture, utilization, or storage. In fact, only 7% of the total number of proposals comprise a full chain, full CCUS chain. And actually looking at all the proposals, we had actually also 7% of proposals which have potential for net carbon removals or negative emission technologies. Maybe some of you are more acquainted with this term. And just to say that the capture of CO2 comes from all different industrial sectors. Sometimes we have biogenic CO2. We have even projects which aim to capture CO2 from the air. And also all the utilization actually options result in many different products such as fuels, chemicals, and construction materials. So this is all that I wanted to say on the Innovation Fund.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Maria, and a big thanks to everyone from the EC for those informative and frankly encouraging presentations. Certainly much to be excited about in the coming future. So as we shift to the Q&A session, I'd like to remind our attendees to please continue to submit questions using the question pane at any time. I'll go ahead and ask all the panelists, here we go, to please enable your webcams, and I'll once again be turning it back to Stig to lead this portion of the event. Take it away.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to all of you, the presenters. It has been very interesting so far. We have a lot of questions here. We'll just start asking, and the one who feels most responsible for replying should then take the floor. I think the first one would be more a general question in a sense, but I will make it two-part, and that is a question that says the key is to reduce the emissions as much as possible, and how would you ensure that CCS will not crowd out other CO2 reduction measures? And what do you see the role of direct air capture to be?
Yeah, perhaps I can say that for direct air capture, we are considering as a research innovation action, but since we have other technologies at the moment who are more mature, we will aim to fund this first in the first years of Horizon Europe, and then at later years we will consider direct air capture also in our programs. I don't know if colleagues want to say something else.
I can maybe add from our perspective, from DG Climate Action perspective, is that the combination of direct air capture and CCS is obviously very interesting because it can deliver net carbon removals. But for the moment, we also see it as a bit too early stage, and so long as we have actually point sources of CO2, it seems unreasonable to insist to capture CO2 from the air. Of course, if the business case is there, why not? But in principle, we are supportive, but more in the longer run. As for crowding out other technologies, we don't see it like that. We actually see it that all technologies have a role to play. And if you look at our modeling, we get to climate neutrality only if we use all technologies, including CCS, but a lot of renewables, of course, hydrogen, energy efficiency. We need basically to use all options.
I would like to complement what Maria said. Through the choice of instruments that we have, we want to avoid this crowding out, for which we also don't see that there is a danger at the moment. You know, the ETS price, the carbon price, the idea is that the most cost-effective solution is found, but this is modified through energy policy, for instance, where we have clear targets for energy efficiency and for renewables. So I think for us it's clear that that those two will bear the bulk of the decarbonisation effort, but we cannot reach climate neutrality without CCS.
Good, thank you. The next question is also, do the support schemes under the European Union support both investments and OPEX, or CAPEX and OPEX, operating costs as well?
Well, I can answer for the Innovation Fund. For sure, we consider both CAPEX and OPEX, but OPEX over 10-year period of time. I actually should have explained that. So the financial gap, which is resulting from considering both CAPEX and OPEX.
Thank you. And the next one is for Vasilios. How do you ensure the safe storage part of CCS in Horizon Europe?
Yes, as I mentioned already, we aim to continue to fund research on CO2 storage and focusing on monitoring and verification, of course, in the storage pilots. We don't plan to include it in our first goals because there was already some topics, last topics in Horizon 2020. But we aim, of course, to include it in our later years. And this will be one of the main issues, especially when we address the full chain of CCS. It's very important to ascertain the CO2 storage. And this, of course, is addressed under the set plan, and will continue to fund with the appropriate budget within Horizon Europe.
Thank you. The next one is for, I think it's for Catherine. You mentioned why shipping and trucks and the storage reservoir was not included in the revised 10E, but can you, you may have said this, but it was a bit patchy sound, that what cross-border aspects are included and what will the role of transit countries be in such a cross-border scenario be?
I think she's muted.
Catherine, we can't hear you.
Catherine, I think you are muted. Okay. I'm sorry that we don't hear you that well, so maybe we can get that question answered in writing. Maybe it would be so we can give people the chance to get the answer in after this session. Next question is, what role do you see CCS on waste to energy? What role would that have in the European Green Deal?
Will you answer,
Maybe
Maria? Okay, yeah, please.
Maybe who is coming in? Maybe I give it a try, and then
Go ahead.
and then colleagues can complete what I have to say. Of course, at the end, when approaching to near or net zero emissions, all sectors will have to decarbonize or compensate for the residual emissions. And there I think do agree that that waste to energy is an excellent alternative or a better alternative to landfills. But we shouldn't overlook the emissions that are coming today from the waste to energy sector. So CCS is indeed a potential way of getting rid of those emissions. And indeed, if you consider biogenic waste, then there is even a potential for negative emissions from the sector. So there is really a potential in the waste to energy sector to contribute via CCS to our climate targets.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
definitely.
you.
Just want to add that, of course, the priority is to reduce waste in the first place, so this waste doesn't happen. But as in the EU, we are actually envisaging to ban landfill, it is quite likely that actually waste incineration will increase. And this is why Peter is quite right in saying that actually CCS becomes even more important, because we cannot leave these emissions to the air. So in Innovation Fund, we also very happy to support such projects if they meet all our criteria.
Yeah, also
Thank
from
you.
the
And I think, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, from the research innovation point of view, also I'd like to mention that we do plan to support it because we think that it falls under the industrial applications of CCUS. So it's okay also for funding there. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think this might be the final question because we are approaching the end of the webinar, but it's a question that I would like all of you to answer in turn. That is, the EU, as Peter said, has more than 20 years of experience with CCS. What do you think has changed today, and what have we learned so far? I think you have 1 minute each maximum to reply to that. So we start with you, Peter.
Many things have changed, I think, during these 20 years. The technology, the different aspect of this long technology chain of food chain CCS have been improved. Carbon CO2 capture is really key, and we do see there a lot of room for further improvements. So we are putting a lot of research and innovation money also in the CO2 capture in the different sectors. So that's an aspect where the cost should still come lower down, and together with the energy penalties of CO2 capture, and so that's one thing. And as far as building out the full CCS infrastructure, that will be the real challenge for this decade for different sectors, moving away from the point sources to storage site approach to a kind of a clustered CCS approach. That will be, I think, the challenge and the way of direction in this decade.
Thank you. Vasilios?
Yeah, I think as Peter has said, many things have changed and improved. We have seen, I will touch the international domain. We have seen the international collaborations of the EU with many countries, with Korea, China, Australia, Canada, US, and this has brought very much the technology forward. I think the technology is ready and mature to be applied. Of course, there are technologies that we need to bring the cost down and make sure that CO2 storage is safe. But I think it's time now to move to deployment in order to achieve our targets.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the focus has changed clearly, and so which has also due to the changes in the energy sector with the rapid cost decrease of renewables. And now we see the focus on industrial applications, where it will still be very important in the future. And a big change is to come with now the new approach to storage and the Northern Lights project and the storage site in Norway, which will hopefully also allow small scale projects to develop around this new storage possibility. And the first one probably in Norway, but then also in some of the member states.
Great, thank you. Maria?
Well, maybe I start with what has not changed. We're still waiting to see some big, really big and successful commercial CCS plants in mainland Europe, if I may say so, well, outside Norway. But we really, I mean, the urgency has also increased because, I mean, we keep on saying we need CCS now. we need in this decade to really demonstrate all the low carbon technologies we will be using up until 2050, because there's only one investment cycle in industry. And then maybe another element that has been added in addition to what my colleagues have said is the utilization element, but other than maybe understood outside Europe, so not enhanced oil recovery, but utilization of CO2 into products, into fuels, chemicals, or building materials, even if we know the contribution will be small, because the volumes of CO2 that can be converted to useful products are small in comparison to storage, it still adds a bit of a diversity and flexibility to what we do with the CO2 that will be captured.
Thank you. And finally, Catherine.
Yeah, well, I think I agree with my my co-speakers. I mean, the urgency has changed. The urgency is much bigger now, which also makes it a more interesting option for governments to co-fund. There's more focus on the issue, and with indeed, as Jan said, the Northern Lights project and the very first project in Europe to have received funding for works under CEF, the Rotterdam-Antwerp North Seaport project. I mean, if these two really come off the ground, we already see a growing interest from other project promoters to join the list of PCI projects. So it's relatively good news.
Yes, I fully agree on that one.
Thank you.
I think we have reached the end of our allotted time here. So thank you very much to all of you who have participated as speakers. It was a very interesting session. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And if you see at the bottom, if you need to contact us or want to contact us in the STEM CCUS initiative, you will see the different channels that we are reachable on, and this session would also be available, as Kevin said, on the YouTube channel. So do you have any final words, Kevin, for the participants, or if not, I thank you very much.
Nope, well said. Yep, please follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and check out the YouTube playlist for the recording to be uploaded shortly.
Great. Thank you all. This was very interesting, and I hope you enjoyed the session, and we will see each other at the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, thank you.